Hello, my beautiful friends. Welcome to True Crime and Wine. Thank you for being patient with me. Your girl's getting sick. Oriana was sick a couple weeks ago, and we thought, oh, maybe it's just one of those, she's growing up and getting a little bit sick. Growing pains, growing sickness. Nobody got anything. Then Reverie went down. Now Big Guy's going down, and I'm going down with him. Things are slow moving. I'm in a braid that I slept in. So thank you for coming and hanging out with me and making me feel better. If you're new here, hi, hello, welcome. I'm Sherilyn. I'm so glad you found me. If you're not new here, welcome back. Thank you for joining me every single upload. I love and I freaking appreciate you so much. That's how much. We're gonna get right into it today. Before we do, I have a quick message for you. I want to give a huge thank you again to our sponsor today, HelloFresh. Hello Fire is more like it, because that's what their meals have been. Fire. Seriously, I feel like they just get better and better, which is very hard to do when you're already the best. Like the last meals were the best I had, and now these ones are the best I've had. This week, my brother and sister were over, and we decided to bust out some HelloFresh. We were kind of keeping it casual, getting some work done, and we were just like having little snacks around dinner time. And one of the meals that came were these potato nachos that I really wanted to try. And I thought, okay, well, that's perfect. It's a fun spin on a favorite snack or appetizer, but in a meal. And we were already having a very snacky, appy, mealy type night. And it did not disappoint. We all loved it. I will be getting it again anytime I see it on the menu. I might even try it with chicken, which is one of the ways that I've noticed how HelloFresh is wanting to simplify things for their customers and make things more personal. You can swap out your protein for another. Same with your sides, or if you want to add a protein or add a side, you can do that too. Another game-changing pro tip, let's say you're on vacation or at an Airbnb or you're out somewhere staying with family and you want to make sure you're still getting your meals because A, who wants to spend a fortune eating out for every single meal while you're away? And B, who wants to spend the time in a grocery store wasting that precious vacay time figuring out what you're going to have to cook? Not me. So you can update your address to like say an Airbnb or a family's house and it will come there. And I mean, they don't just have dinners either. So if you want help with quick breakfasts, lunches, snacks, desserts, the list goes on. It gives you more chance to soak in the sun, sip on a cool little cocktail, not wasting time in grocery stores, feeling overwhelmed about what you're supposed to plan and make, especially during this last little bit of summer. I always gotta flex a little bit too because I do feel pretty proud to support and be supported by a company that is the first carbon neutral meal kit company and that nearly all of their packaging is recyclable, makes you feel good. On top of that, having things pre-packaged so that you're not adding to food waste is another huge bonus. I'm telling you, if you haven't checked them out, you just gotta go to HelloFresh.com, use my code Sherilyn16 for 16 free meals across 7 boxes and 3 free gifts. Once again, go to HelloFresh.com, use my code Sherilyn16 for 16 free meals across 7 boxes and 3 free gifts. Thank you again so much, HelloFresh. All right, riddle time. Today's riddle is, there's this one-story house that's all yellow. Everything is yellow. Yellow walls, yellow doors, even the furniture is yellow. What color are the stairs? I feel like this is one that every single person is gonna get. All right, let's get rocking. Today we are talking about a case that I was reading about and I couldn't stop. It was one of those true crimes that almost played out like a soap opera, so you couldn't even believe it. I had to constantly keep reminding myself, this really happened. And it happened, like a little bit back in the day. And it's always those cases where I don't know why, but for some reason I feel like, anybody born around like 1920, 1930, they're too sweet to be all killery and stuff. This case taught me that is so not the fact though. Today we are talking about the heartless crimes of Gladys, Ralph, Lincoln, Broadhurst, Williams, the list goes on. The list of last names goes on. Gladys Ralphs was born the only girl and middle child of 5 to William and Anna Ralphs. She grew up very close to her siblings. They all adored her and had her back no matter what. I think especially because she was the only girl. They even had a special nickname for her. They called her Flea. The family grew up practicing the Mormon faith. There was a strong sense of family, sticking together. Gladys's brothers were respectable young dudes in the community. It was Gladys who was the troublemaker, but any and every time she got in trouble, her brothers would be there to bail her out. My impression of Gladys is almost like that mentality stuck with her as she got older. I think she kind of felt like she was untouchable, invincible. She always had family to stick up for her. So she never really felt consequences. And I think that she felt like she was above consequences. I think one of the negative things among many of not having consequences, specifically for Gladys, is that I think one gets almost bored with not being challenged, not getting in trouble. You can walk all over people or do bad things and there's no repercussion. So it's almost like that action intensifies. And Gladys seemed to get particularly bored when it came to males in her life. I would say she liked the chase. She liked making guys fall in love with her and then just ghosting. That pattern started young and it carried out throughout her life. On May 19th, 2027, Gladys marries for the first time when she is 20 years old. She married a young man named William Hendricks. They lived in Minidoka, Idaho. Population then was about only 200. Small town feel. Seems like Gladys wanted to give that a shot, but it wasn't for her. Her eyes quickly strayed and the marriage was over less than a year after it started because of her infidelity. 14 months after her first marriage, she marries for a second time. She married her lover who she was cheating on her first husband with. He was a railroad clerk named Albert Richardson. They moved to Burley, Idaho. This marriage lasted a little bit longer, 2 years, but by that point she was over it, left her husband and was back on the prowl, which her family wasn't the happiest about, but like I said, they supported her no matter what. They justified things for her. Her brothers were very strict Mormons and divorce was not a part of their beliefs. On top of divorce not being fondly looked upon in the Mormon faith, neither was extramarital affairs, which she was also struggling with. It seems like this second marriage had ended because she had taken quite a liking to the chiropractor that her and her husband were both seeing. His name was Dr. Willis David Broadhurst. And it seems like they were doing a bit more than cracking bones, if you know what I'm saying. I think after this divorce, though, she did take some of her family's advice and take some time for herself. Marriage obviously wasn't her forte at the time. So she stayed single for about 7 years. She and her family formed a little family band. They called it the Ralph's Novelty Orchestra. And I guess they traveled around the US performing for people. I guess she had a gorgeous voice. They had fans. But a little US tour, I think, was kind of all it was. They never went worldwide or anything like that. So then in 1939, after her long break from the marriage scene, she marries her third husband. He's a man named Carroll Anderson, and he lived in Westwood, California, where he worked at the Red River Lumber Company. And she was a fan of California life. She was close to the beach, Beverly Hills, and lots of burly dudes, which she was into because Westwood was a hardworking milling town. That eye candy became too much for her. Less than a year, they were divorced. No skin off Gladys's back, though. She jumped right into another marriage in June 1940, so the same year she divorced. She marries her fourth husband, Virgil Warner. He also worked at the Red River Lumber Company, which I think became a pretty hot topic of discussion at the water cooler. I don't know if they had water coolers in the 40s. Regardless, it didn't take Virgil long to get another job. I think all of the drama and the talking got to him. So they moved to Medford, Oregon, which after having this taste of California lifestyle, Gladys is not a fan of. So she files for divorce a fourth time and decides to move back to Sacramento on her own. She's doing her thing, and then during World War II, Gladys meets Dreamboat Lieutenant Leslie Lincoln. He was 24, which was 11 years younger than Gladys was at the time, which I think kind of did not really prepare him for somebody who's super experienced in like the man-eating industry. Sure enough, 19 months after she divorced Virgil, she marries Leslie. Oh, and one thing about her too, when she gets married, she likes to fudge with her certificates a little bit. I think almost a way to reinvent herself in each marriage, maybe. Most of the time, she would shave a few years off of her age. When she married Leslie, she was 35, but she said she was 32 on the certificate. And she also said that this was only her second marriage, not her fifth marriage. Shortly after getting married, they settle into Inglewood, California, but they didn't get to really experience that newlywed bliss or anything. Leslie was quickly transferred to the East Coast. So he's on the opposite side and they're not seeing each other. But Gladys is cool as a cucumber. She's in California, which is where she wants to be. And for 2 years, they lived their lives apart, which was fine with Gladys. She didn't even question divorcing because she got to do her own thing. She had her freedom. She got to hang out with whoever she pleased and no one was looking over her shoulder. On top of that, she was also being financially cared for because her husband is sending checks to her. All's good until he's discharged and sent home, which you think should be the time they're looking most forward to. It turns out this perfect married life that was expected was not so perfect because Gladys didn't like being in an actual marriage and seeing her husband every day. When Leslie gets back, he realizes Gladys really isn't the person he fell in love with. While he was gone, she had been prescribed Nembutal to help sleep, and she was abusing the prescription and became very addicted. It seemed like when Leslie came home, she was kind of using the drug to keep herself out and sleeping most of the days so that she didn't really have to be present in the reality of being married full time. It didn't take long after he returned home that she set her eyes on somebody new. Well, he wasn't new because they had previously already met and had issues within one of her other marriages, but it's new in terms of it wasn't her current husband. She started reaching out to her old chiropractor from 20 years ago who was doing more than back cracking, Dr. Gladys Broadhurst. No one really knows how or why, but it's assumed that she knew that Dr. Broadhurst had done quite well for himself. And she just decides one day to send him a telegram asking him, what's going on and letting him know that after all of these years, she's never forgotten about him. She says he still floods her dreams, and if he's interested, he can reply so that they can keep in touch. He replies stat. He lays it all out there. He's like, I've got no wife, I've no kids, no heirs, no responsibility. I've done very well at my practice. I have 2 ranches, and he wants to know what she's been up to all of these years. So he sends a letter back and is anxiously waiting her reply. Gladys is stoked to hear back from him, especially that there's no wife or children in the picture. She loved the idea of being Mrs. Dr. Broadhurst, but she didn't want him to think that that was what she was after. She wanted him to believe she had her own money so that he would be more inclined to locking her down because there was no ulterior motive. So she writes back. She says she's a widow with no children. And she really lays it on thick. She says since she hadn't been treated by him after all of these years, her health just never seems the best. No one cared for her like he did. She credits him with keeping her alive because she had been in so much pain at that time that she didn't know if she could go on, really making it clear that she looked at him like a savior. She goes as far to say that since he kept her alive, she feels forever thankful for him and she needs to show him that. And one way that she can do it is by financially showing her gratitude. She says she has this Aunt Mary out in Honolulu who was very wealthy, had recently passed away, and she inherited her $3 million fortune. It turns out Gladys did have an Aunt Mary who lived in Honolulu, but she didn't die and she was not a millionaire. But she wanted him to believe that she had her own money and didn't need anything from him and wanted to take care of him. So they keep writing to each other back and forth. Leslie isn't finding out, mostly because he worked really long hours. So Gladys was definitely living two separate lives. Through their correspondence, she learns that Dr. Broadhurst is living quite lavishly, especially for this era. He lives on a 160-acre ranch in Oregon. He didn't live there by himself, though. He lived there with his nephew, his nephew's wife, and their two children. But his nephew was almost like a son to him. He was even in the process of taking over Dr. Broadhurst's practice because he was also a doctor, and he was kind of on his way of phasing out into the retirement life. The two of them they're sizzling over letters. It gets to the point where they decide to meet up where she lives in Sacramento, and they go and they spend an evening at a hotel. I guess she gave him a smooch on this first visit, and after that he was hooked. So she's got this doctor in her talons, but unlike her other relationships and other marriages and affairs interweaving, once she attaches onto the affair, usually she would divorce her husband, but she didn't do this with Leslie. And she wanted to make sure that if they ever ran into each other, since the doctor was coming to Sacramento, she had her bases covered. So she tells Willis that Leslie died in the Second World War in an air raid, but Leslie had an evil twin brother named Lester, and Lester found out about this huge inheritance that she got. So he started assuming Leslie's identity, forcing Gladys to pretend to be married to him. And she feared for his life because he was very abusive and wouldn't let her get away from him, which completely consumes the doctor. He's always writing back like, protect yourself, please stay safe. I don't know why I can't just get you out here in Oregon and take care of you. And this whole time is very confusing for me because it seems like she had an out, and Leslie could feel that his wife was definitely not who he married, and she was continually pulling away. So he files for divorce, only to change his mind 4 days later and try to reconcile because she said she didn't want to divorce him. And that's so confusing to me because there was no need to string him along. She could have just moved on. She obviously had the doctor hooked, but for whatever reason, she just keeps stringing him along. It's almost like she needed that validation from him. Maybe I think she respected the fact that he was a lieutenant and maybe wasn't quite ready to give that up and liked that he loved her. But she wasn't willing to work things out because 3 weeks after he changes his mind, she says she's going on a road trip to visit family. But really, she meets Dr. Willis in Reno and they get married. So she's committed bigamy. But back then, there isn't really a way to instantly track this. They couldn't just go on the computer and be like, oh, Gladys, you are already married, girl. So they spend the weekend together after getting married. And they both agree that for her safety, they should keep it under wraps so that Lester, the evil twin, didn't find out. The plan was for her to go back to Sacramento, get all of her affairs in order safely, and then on July 1st, he would come out and get her. During this time, they're still keeping in touch through letters. Now they're referring to each other as husband and wife. And up until this point, she had always been able to intercept the letters before Leslie found them. But a couple weeks before she was set to leave, Leslie got the mail first. He realizes through the letter that not only is she having an affair, but she's married. So he goes back to his lawyer, says, okay, we are going to follow through with the divorce. And also he wants to add bigamy to the reason of divorce and have it investigated. So she freaks out. She sends a letter to Willis and she says that she's got blood poisoning in her leg. The doctor wants to amputate it. She knows all she needs is her savior of a husband, though. And so they need to expedite the move and get her out there sooner. At this point, he hadn't even told his family that he was married. I'm sure there was an element of them questioning it because they didn't even know he was seeing a lady. But now he tells his nephew that, surprise, he was seeing somebody, they're married, and she's moving out to the ranch to join them. Dr. Broadhurst drives 10 hours to go and pick her up, and when he gets there, she's in rough shape, but not physically or medically, on the verge of needing a leg amputation. He can sense that she's abusing Nembutal. When they get back to the ranch, he reaches out to a doctor friend of his who comes and assesses her and confirms that she's deep in addiction. And the best way to help her is to hospitalize her so that she can be properly weaned off. She goes to the hospital. Within 2 weeks of care there, she's discharged. She successfully came off of her medication, and Willis was super excited to start their married life together. Despite there being challenges of most of your correspondence being through mail and that taking time to get there, Gladys finds out that the sheriff is looking for her on bigamy charges back in Sacramento. So she knows that she's got to go back to California and try to just nip this in the bud. She tells Willis that she has to go back, but it's for finalizations on this big inheritance that she's going to get from her aunt passing. It turned out to be a perfect time for her because Willis was in the middle of tending to the ranch, so he couldn't take time away from it. And so she said, it's all good, I'll go by myself. Since she didn't drive though, she needed a chauffeur. So Willis hires a young man that he knows that was striving to be a cowboy named Alvin Williams. The doctor felt really comfortable with him. He thought he was a good kid, knew him quite well. So he reaches out and sees if he'd be okay with driving his wife to California and staying with her, so she gets this all wrapped up while he's doing work on the ranch. At first, Alvin's not really down with the plan. He didn't think he was a good driver, and he had no desire to go to somewhere like California. So the doctor sweetens the deal and he says, it's probably going to be 2 weeks, no longer than 2 weeks, and I'll pay you $5 a day. So he agrees, and the two leave on August 5th, 1946. The first day on the road, they make a stop in her favorite place, Reno. They watch a show, have dinner, and that night she suggests that the two of them just sleep in the back of the car since it was so late to get a hotel. Initially, he's really nervous because he respects Dr. Broadhurst so much, but with Gladys's convincing, he agrees. And they're laying down, they're talking, and Gladys says that he reminds her of her brother who had passed in the war and asks if she could give him a brotherly, sisterly kiss on the cheek. He nervously agrees. She gives him a kiss on the cheek and then goes in for the lips. And at that moment, that was it for him. He was all tangled up. When they get back on the road, she decides that they should stay with her other brother for a few nights and visit the fam. They were assigned separate rooms, but at nighttime they would sneak into each other's, stay there until like the early morning and sneak back before anybody woke up. Apparently her brother did very much like the company of Alvin. He also agreed that he did remind him of their brother. So they stuck around for about 10 days, just having a merry old time. The issue is, though, Gladys is married. She's supposed to be confronting the divorce and tracking down this bigamy charge and getting that taken care of. And they were expected to be back in 10 days, and they hadn't even made it to Sacramento yet. And poor Dr. Willis, he's sending letters every day saying how much he misses her, how much he can't wait till she gets back so they can spend these exciting times together and get their life going. He's also sending money to her. And she's writing back saying she's missing him too, but her brother's just been so happy to see her. Alvin's having a great time too. And they're really just waiting on the judge to get things in order. So it shouldn't be too much longer. Once that is ready to go, they'll be heading back and they'll never have to spend a day apart. She signed her letters, your little mommy's wife. Lil, L-I-L, yeah. And Lil Mommy's wife was no doting wife, Kel Surprise. She and Alvin were in a full-blown affair, and being only 23, Alvin just did not stand a chance to how, again, experienced she was in this lifestyle. She's almost 40 by this point, well-versed in being a serial cheater. And she's making him feel so special. Throughout their journey, they're checking into hotels as Mr. Al Williams and wife. One evening during the trip, they decide to have a little date night, take a little break from the hotel shenanigans. They go have dinner and they go to a movie, and the movie they see is The Postman Rings Twice. I've never seen it, but I guess the synopsis of it is a drifter gets a job at a gas station. The owner of the gas station has a young, beautiful wife who falls in love with the drifter employee. They get in this dramatic affair, and then they decide they need to kill her husband, who's his boss. After the movie, she looks at Alvin and says, it's too bad something like that can't happen to the doctor. Alvin's not really sure if she was joking, but he wanted to make it clear that even though he had crossed the line into having an affair with her, he didn't think it was funny and would not be down with killing somebody. Gladys thought, though, with some time and sexual persuasion, she could probably change his mind, and she was right. She got him on board, and she really solidified that it was the right thing to do and got him agreeing to it by saying that the doctor was abusive behind closed doors. So really, Alvin would be protecting her. Now, throughout all of this planning and scheming, she did manage to get a divorce from Leslie. Instead of heading back, though, when all of that was wrapped up, she and Alvin decided to hang around for another 4 weeks. By the time they headed back to Dr. Willis, it had almost been 2 months. She was very good at keeping him believing that she missed him so much, and her manipulation was just so torturous, I want to say. There was a point where she was writing him and saying that she missed him so much that she even wanted him to just take a couple days and come out and join them so she could just see him before she made it all the way back. And he does. When he gets there, he is not comfortable with the relationship. He doesn't think they're having an affair, but he's jealous. Another guy has been hanging out with his new bride for the past 2 months, and he tells Alvin he can't afford to pay him anymore. Alvin says he understands and that he was in the process of finding out what he was going to do next. He was floating around the idea of staying with Gladys's brother and working on his ranch with him. But for whatever reason, even though Alvin hadn't figured out what he was going to do, the doctor goes back without Gladys. No one knows what was said between the two of them to convince him that she needed to stay a little bit longer. All we know is he left without taking her at that time. Ultimately, Alvin decides he's not going to stay and work for her brother, and he's going to take Gladys back for free. They make their way back to the ranch, but not before another stop in Reno, this time to get married. Bigamist. She didn't want anything getting tracked back to her, though, so this time she got married under the name Elaine Hamilton. They don't stay long enough for a honeymoon or anything like that. They carry on back to her other husband. And the timing was very interesting because the doctor was set to go on his annual elk hunting trip, which he did every single year. He'd go with his friends and his nephews, and he'd usually be gone for 2 weeks. Days before he leaves, Gladys tells him she'd feel a lot more secure, that if anything were to happen to him, she'd be taken care of. She wanted him to go to the lawyer, take off all of his relatives from his will, and just have her on there. At this point, he's so excited to see her. He misses her. He feels like there's a little bit of a shift in the relationship, and he's trying to get that back and really make her happy. So he instantly goes, changes it, and then he leaves 2 days later for his trip. Now, the doctor and his nephew were gone, but the nephew had his wife and children at the house. So someone's there to keep an eye on Gladys, but Gladys wants Alvin over there. So Alvin comes over saying he's so sick and he only trusts the doctor with his health. And since he was gone, the second best thing would be Gladys. Gladys moves him on in, gets him all set up in the doctor's bedroom. And she says she was just going to sleep in the room next door, which so happened you could get through it through the windows. His nephew's wife wasn't oblivious. She knew what was going on and she was a mess about it. She thought the best way to move forward, though, was to act like Gladys's friend, almost keep your friends close and your enemies closer. So she tagged along to outings that they would do. They'd go all to dances together, for dinner, movies. She didn't know how she was going to deal with it, though, because she did know that the doctor finally in his life seemed to be so happy and found his soulmate, which he hadn't. So part of her was almost like, okay, well, I don't know if I'm going to say anything yet, but at least if I'm here, I'm putting a little bit of a wedge and distance between them. What she didn't know was that not only were things happening behind closed doors, but whenever they had a moment alone, they were constantly solidifying their plan to murder the doctor. The plan was to purchase a cheap car. Alvin would set up on the back road that the doctor used to go to his other ranch, which he did often. He'd cause some sort of diversion and get the doctor out of his vehicle. And then when he was out, he would hit him with a wrench, killing him. And if the wrench didn't work, he was going to bring a shotgun as backup. 2 weeks passes. The doctor comes back from his hunting trip, and he's not impressed that Alvin has been hanging around the whole time. Not only that, but even when he returned for a good few days, Alvin lingered. He would go out to all the dances that everyone went to and dinners and be a tag-along. Again, though, Dr. Broadhurst was just doing whatever he could to keep his wife happy. She expressed that they became close friends and he was just a friend and was upset at the idea of Alvin not being around and invited, so he just kind of went along with it. Less than a week of Willis being home, he announces that the next morning he's going to go out to the ranch in Jordan Valley. Gladys looks at Alvin like, you know what to do. So that night, Alvin drove about 14 miles just north of Jordan Valley and waited for the morning. The impression I got from reading was that Alvin still was very uneasy with the plan. He needed a lot of whiskey to get himself drunk enough to do this. But Gladys just kept insisting that it needed to be done and that she was being abused. And now that the doctor was home, the abuse was getting worse. In the morning time, he pops his hood open to try to make it look like he's having some car trouble. And Alvin and Gladys thought Willis was going to wake up early. He was going to get a nice fresh start on the day and just head straight out to the ranch. But that morning, he decided to hang around the house for a little bit, have some breakfast. He tinkered around with some things. Then he went and had lunch with a friend who... It just makes you so sad because that whole meetup could have maybe changed the course of action because the doctor asked him to come along with him because he didn't have much on the go. And for a couple minutes, he had agreed. At the end of the lunch, though, he decided the best thing was going to be for him to come out the next day instead. The doctor heads back on the road. Meanwhile, Alvin's been waiting, and a guy's already pulled over to see if he needed help, and he says no, he's got a friend that's just gone into town to grab an auto part, and then he'll be back and help him out. This is another moment where things could have changed because Alvin considered going back and not doing anything because now somebody has seen him. But around 3:30, he sees Willis driving up. He waves at him and the doctor sees that it's Alvin and he pulls over and he says, "Do you need help?" And Alvin asks if he's got any pliers in the car because it seems to be something going on with a gasket. I'm not even going to pretend like I understand. The doctor says yes, he can help him out. He pulls up ahead and he gets out to come and assist Alvin. He starts tinkering with the car and Alvin's standing behind him. He looks around, makes sure there's no cars coming and no one's in sight, and he takes this massive wrench that he has and he hits the doctor over the head 3 times. The doctor stumbles away. He's bleeding from his head and allegedly says to Alvin, "What hit me?" At this point, Alvin said he had a change of heart and he felt bad, so he got a t-shirt, gave it to the doctor to soak up the blood, and wasn't going to kill him anymore. But then he said all of a sudden the doctor pulled out a pocket knife that he had on him and told him he was going to kill him. At that point, Alvin said that he had no choice but to reach beside him in the car, pull out his shotgun, and shoot the doctor. After a bunch of struggling, Alvin managed to get the doctor in the back of his vehicle, and then he drove up to more of a secluded area to hide his body. When the doctor pulled over, though, he was not just by himself in his truck. He also had his trailer and a horse, and that was left at the scene. So that evening, somebody who was good friends with the doctor and his nephew calls because he sees the horse loose and just wandering around, and there was no sign of the doctor anywhere. So Floyd calls the police right away because something's wrong. A search party was immediately put together to look for the doctor. And from the very first interview that the sheriff had with Floyd, he says something's off with Gladys. Even though she was home while all of this went on, she just kept coming to his mind. He tells him all about Gladys being away, that his uncle had hired Alvin as the chauffeur, and ever since they returned, he's just been lingering around and his uncle's been really uncomfortable with it. Then the first day into the search, the sheriff gets a tip from the man who saw Alvin on the side of the road, and the sheriff asks if he'd be able to identify him if he saw him, and he says he thinks he could. So Alvin's freaking out because this guy's describing him and his vehicle. So he scrambles to try to change the look of the car. He paints it black from blue, swaps out the tires, changes like the hood cover. The next day, the sheriff goes to the Broadhurst house to interview Gladys, who has Alvin with her, and she introduces him as her chauffeur and bodyguard. They're like, perfect, this is exactly who we're looking for. And they ask to see his vehicle. He brings it to them and they take it to process, but they let him go. When they take the vehicle, Gladys knows that they're suspicious about something and immediately offers up an alibi. She says that they were together the entire day the doctor was gone, so there's no way it could be him. And then she added that he could never carry out a crime because blood makes him faint. Which at this point, no one had even found a body or anything. So it's like, how do you know there's blood, Gladys? She offers up an idea though. She says, if anybody's behind this, it's my dead husband's evil twin brother, Lester. You can't make this shit up. Well, I mean, Gladys could. She reiterates the whole story of this evil twin that's after her for this $3 million. And they decide to take her and Alvin in to the station for her to write an official statement and for them to get Alvin away from her and ask some questions. Right away, they saw that he was not doing well. He was really shaky, nervous, he was sweating profusely, and it didn't take him long once he was separated from Gladys to confess to the murder of Dr. Willis and bring them to his remains. Quickly after, Gladys was arrested on suspicion after she was told that his body was found, but she wouldn't admit to anything. And they were in a little bit of a tight spot because Alvin also wouldn't implicate her. He took full responsibility himself. But all of her secrets from her past started coming up, so they could use that. Everyone finds out she's now a 2-time bigamist. There's no evil twin, and she's married to Alvin. Once Alvin finds out, he's not the only special one that she's broken the rules for to get married to, he was ready to talk, and by the time her trial rolled around, he was the star witness. He confessed to being the murderer, but said that it was all her plan. After the trial, it only took 3 hours for the jury to find her guilty. The vote was not unanimous for the death sentence, even though the prosecutors were trying to go for that, which was rare for a woman at this time. So she was sentenced to life. 2 days after she was convicted, Alvin also pleaded guilty and was given a life sentence. And despite her being found guilty of killing her husband, she was still able to inherit his money. His sisters needed to take her to court to try to get it. And at the end, the sisters were granted 2/3, but Gladys still got 1/3 of the estate, which turned out to be like $51,000, which back then was a shit ton. Apparently, the annual income was $2,600. And another kicker is Alvin and Gladys never served true life sentences. She was out in 9 years when she was 50, and he was out in 10. And Gladys went on to marry again. She married her husband, Leo, and they were married the longest that she had ever been married, 12 years, until she died in 1973. Alvin went on to marry too. He had a wife, they had kids and a family, and he lived until 2010. I read the book Till Death Do Us by Patrick Gallagher, and in it he included a link to a bunch of the letters between Gladys and the doctor. If you like that type of stuff, I'll put the link in my description. Also, like I said, if you like reading books, this was a one-dayer because I just couldn't put it down. Very interactive, very engaging, and very unbelievable that this was real life. I can't believe I'd never heard of Gladys before. Oh, Gladys. Just the worst. Poor Dr. Broadhurst. He just sounded adorable. Right at that point that you're waiting to get at life where your days are just whatever you want to do. For him, just kicking it at the ranch. And she goes on and ruins it and then gets to basically live another life after her sentence. All right, you guys, that's it for me today. I'm fading. I need to take a Neocitrin and go to bed. Maybe a Neocitrin with a little whiskey. I don't think that's encouraged. All right, if you haven't already, please don't forget to like and subscribe. You know you don't have to, but it really does mean the world to me and helps me out so much. I love and I appreciate you so much. The answer to today's riddle, quick refresher, there's a 1-story house in which everything is yellow. Yellow walls, yellow doors, yellow furniture. What color are the stairs? And the answer is no color. There are no stairs because it's a 1-story house. I know you all got it. All right, I'll see you in the next video. I'll miss you terribly. Until then, make sure to love each other, love yourself, and I will see you soon.